Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. This is the second monthly Adaptive Cards developer community call. It's effectively, we're trying to engage with the community as deeply as we can, preview cool stuff. Today is actually a pretty fun topic. We're gonna preview something completely new. The best part is we'll release it by the end of this call for you to play with. So it won't be something we just kind of tease and say it'll come at some future point. So that's the community call today. It's on a monthly cadence, basically second Thursday of the month. So the next call will be March 14th, again at 9 a.m. Hopefully we'll have basically an evolution of what we're showing today. The call agenda so it's mainly going to be me talking. I'm Matt Heidinger on the Adaptive Cards team. And David, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm David, same team.
So really just one topic on the call today, and that's a sneak preview. If you happen to see my tweet, we're going to talk about data binding in adaptive cards. So templating, how do we separate data from the content, and it's really just a sneak preview, but something definitely you can play with and get going. So again, final piece. Again, I'm Matt and David. You can find us on Twitter and you can find us on email. Please do engage with us, particularly after this talk. This is very much being baked, and your ability to influence the direction is very much in your favor. With that, we're just going to kind of go right to it. So here's the gist. What we're going to do today is talk about the adaptivecards.io samples page where we've got this stock update. Great, the samples page does a good job. You can flip through it. You can see here's some stock cards. Here's maybe what like a good restaurant card would look like. You can obviously click on try it yourself. That launches into the brand new designer that's been out for a couple months now. So this is nice. You can drag drop. But what if you want to now start populating this? This was September 19th was the last time we updated this sample. So what is this process for going from this sample card to real usage? And to demonstrate that, I whipped up a bot yesterday. Let me flip over to that and bear with me for a sec. There's going to be a lot of monitor juggling. So chat, wake up, and then my stock bot. So this is a bot we whipped up, and I will do a quick recap on bots in general, but what I want to show originally is you can talk to the bot, you can say hello, and what that's going to do is say, hi, welcome to the Adaptive Card stock bot, enter a stock symbol to get the latest quote, for example, SVA. And so SVA here was pulled dynamically. If you look on last night when I was doing all these tests, it was different stocks. This was last night at 10 p.m. Wins, DVD. I don't actually know what these are. These are queried from an API that is the biggest gainers of the day. So it's a dynamically retrieved list of suggestions that the bot is just kind of putting your way. So SVA is the top gainer today. I don't fully understand why there's only one, but that's what they sent back. So I can type in a symbol and I find out that it's Sinovac Biotech Limited. They're up 6 cents. Clearly there's a bug in my API, but I'm gonna forgive that for now. But we can type in other stuff. Obviously Microsoft stock, we can pull up like AT&T stock. You can basically just get stock quotes. And so this card obviously looks exactly like this sample. So how did I go about taking this sample, cool, I want to build a stock bot, to actually building it? Well, today, what you would have to do, and I'm going to be in Visual Studio a bit, so hopefully most of you are familiar enough with Visual Studio and bot development, but I did want to give a quick refresher on exactly how bots work. So this was pretty simple. This is me using the bot framework, V4 SDK. The template worked really well, and it ended up being the entire bot, is this 205 lines of code as of now, but by the time we're done, we're going to cut that in almost half. But I want to do a really quick recap on kind of the gist of a bot. Effectively, in C#, you don't have to use their C# SDK. They have a JavaScript SDK, or effectively you just have to write a REST endpoint. But it's a service that responds to a particular set of protocols. So this is the basic flow. Someone joins a conversation with the bot, and they send a signal to your backend saying, hey, someone joined, here's their information. And then effectively they post a message, and your bot responds back. So they have a set of simple APIs. I know maybe sequence diagrams aren't the most user-friendly thing in the world, but effectively what I end up doing is implementing this one method. So I write a bot called my stock bot. Yeah.
You think you could zoom the code area a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Is that a little better?
Maybe slightly more, at least for me.
Sorry.
Perfect. Is
that good?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. And please, by the way, anyone should feel free to chime in, especially if you're not following along. If you have questions on, why did you do it that way? Or have you thought about this? We'll actually probably hold those to the end. But if you have clarifying questions or you're having a hard time following along, please do unmute yourself, chime in, or David, actually, if you want to just monitor the chat and just, stop me. That's totally fine. These are very organic calls. So effectively what I wrote is the C# class, I implement iBot, and the only thing you really have to do is handle this on turn. And this is basically saying something has happened, in the conversation, and your bot has to respond accordingly. So the most common type of action is, there's two really, a message and a conversation was updated. And David, could you see if someone on the call, by the way, if you may have to mute yourself. I'm not sure if Teams is muting, but I heard a little background noise, but please be on.
I looked at it, yeah.
So the conversation update, that basically means someone either joined or left this conversation with a bot. I happen to be in a one-on-one chat with this bot, but bots also work in channels and group conversations. So if someone joins the group or whatever, this is basically you would handle, there's a conversation update. And so in this case, this is where I send my hello. I basically say, hey, welcome to the bot, blah, blah, blah. So that's the first type, conversation was update or on hello. And the second type is just a message. And when someone sends me a message, I'm basically going to send them a stock quote. And that is the gist. And so if it works, I try and retrieve it. If not, it says, sorry, I wasn't able to get data for this symbol. So this is the gist of the bot. And what we're going to look into first is how did I take that stock template and fill it with real data? Well, if I'm a .NET developer, we ship a .NET Adaptive Cards package on NuGet. It's very easy to use. It both renders cards and also helps you serialize them to JSON. So I'm going to quickly walk through. Hopefully this is easy enough to follow. What I'm doing is pulling the text out from the bot. So the symbol, whatever you typed in, I'm assuming is just a stock symbol. So MSFT, not the most error-prone or error-friendly bot, but you kind of get it. If the symbol equals hello, then that's when I'm sending that welcome message. So that's my kind of escape hatch where I send this welcome message. Otherwise, I hit this endpoint, iextrading.com. They offer free stock quotes as long as you put in this, data provided attribution at the bottom. So I'm hitting their API. If that was successful, I am deserializing the response they give me into a stock quote object that I wrote. And then I'm going to send an adaptive card reply old and busted. So this is the old and busted way that we're hoping to move people away from. But this is how most likely you would do it today. This is how I've had to write my .NET apps. And what you effectively do in the old and busted way is first I create a reply. And now I'm going to new up a card. I'm going to reply with a card. And I want it to be this card. I just want it to have real data returned from the API. So what I do is new up a card. I say card body is a new list of adaptive elements. I basically recreate the schema as it is. So it's got a container with 2 text blocks. So I go back here and I say new adaptive container. The container items is a 2 text blocks. And then I put in the company name, in parentheses, the primary exchange, and then the quote symbol. So this is going to get me that first text block here, AT&T, New York Stock Exchange, and then the symbol. So I'm basically just doing basic C# string interpolation to bind. This is a newer, hopefully everyone's semi-familiar with the C# syntax. It lets you basically do inline string interpolation. I'm setting its size to medium. It's subtle. I'm effectively just translating the JSON that we've seen here, text block size medium is subtle, into a C# object model. This is nice because I get IntelliSense. I can do C#y things. I can, it's perfectly acceptable and good, and it makes sure when I serialize to JSON, which is effectively all that I'm doing. Once I've built up this card, and I'll spare you going through all of it, but this is the stock card. So it certainly wasn't hard or difficult to write. It's just a little tedious, and it gets a little bit, error prone if I have a failure. For example, I did have a failure when I was writing this bot. Color here, what we do in the case of the bot is if the stock is up, we want to use an adaptive card good color. And if the stock is down, we use a text block color of attention. So again, adaptive cards has ways of coloring text. I need a way to translate that. So I basically, in C# I have to parse the enum and et cetera. So I'm doing a little bit of work, but it's fine and it works. And I basically say, hey, I'm going to reply with this attachment. I set the content as the card. This is bot framework stuff. When you reply, you can either send a text-based reply or you can add an attachment. And this attachment happens to be an adaptive card, and I'm going to send it. And that's exactly what's happening today. And this works, and this is fine. But I think we can do better. Hopefully that at least is a teeing up on where we're kind of going with this. But what we want to do is do a little better. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a whole new designer. You've seen our designer today. It looks like this. It's got a drag and drop interface, visual tree, and the JSON payload. Well, here, and this is a public URL we're announcing for the first time, is vnext.adaptivecards.io. David, you can type it in the channel if you're able to, but vnext.adaptivecards.io/designer. This thing builds every pull request. It is going to be buggy. We are making no guarantees that it'll even have a standard uptime, but you can certainly play with it today and at least kind of kick the tires. The 2 new things in this are a data editor. So a pane basically of saying, hey, I want this data applied with this card, and a data structure visualizer so we can kind of, visualize the structure of the data. So what I'm going to do first, and everyone's familiar with our, the card that I threw my face on some 2 years ago. We're going to click New Card, and the designer will load up with the set of data that we made up, and we're going to recreate the welcome card really briefly. So I'm going to go say new text block, and I'm going to say welcome to the stock bot, and then I'm going to say $first name. Oops, sorry, brace first.
Matt, you can double click on the text block in the design surface to edit.
Yes, that is pretty cool too. Lots of little tricks in the designer, but yes. So this is the new syntax. So it says, welcome to the stock bot, curly brace, first name, exclamation point. And you'll notice I can't really see, well, what is first name? We see that down here, in the data editor is a first name of John. So there's a button now in the toolbar that is preview mode. And so when I'm in preview mode, I can now apply the template with the data, with the sample data as I would expect. So if I ever change this to David, you can kind of see it updating there. So cool, nice and easy. Templating effectively to a sample data in the card. So what we're going to do is go a little bit fancier. So I know in my bot that when I do my welcome card, I do two things. I say welcome to the stock bot, the person's name, and then I say enter, sorry, I do three things. Then I say enter a stock symbol to get the latest stock quote. And it then shows a list of buttons of the biggest movers of the day. So in my sample data, what I'm going to do is start over. I'm going to add a name, which was going to be Matt. And then you see that I'm going to call these things suggested symbols. Right? And suggested symbols, we'll just fill in MSFT, Goog, and APL, our favorite tech companies. So now I've got this data, and I say it's name, suggested symbols. Now I need to quickly build up the card. I change first name to name. That's nice and easy. So welcome to the stock bot, Matt. And then this one gets a little fun. So I know I could drag drop. I just, I'm so old school. I just like typing in my JSON. So what I did there in the bot is enter a stock symbol to get started, for example, WINS. So what I want to do is grab the first item out of those suggested symbols. Yes, there. Enter a stock symbol to get started, for example, wins. Well, I don't want to hard code wins. I want to bind to suggested symbols 0. And then I want to turn on wrap. And look at that. And then what we're going to do to make sure it looks the same is bold using markdown syntax, Microsoft. So cool. Now you can see we're starting to get some property binding in the designer. Obviously, basic properties work, but we can also do array indexer syntax. So I'm just grabbing the first of that array. Hopefully that makes sense. So far, so good. This next part, the final part, is how do I get a bunch of buttons for all of those suggested symbols? This gets a little bit funky, and I will kind of mention this syntax. We've just started really building this out within the last 3 weeks. But here's where we're at today. Your feedback is absolutely welcome and critical to getting this right. But what we're going to do is have some actions. This action is going to be action.submit. We're going to have a title of, for now, just to make sure we get it all right, we want MSFT. And here's a little trick. I'll by the way, have references of all the URLs and all the docs. But this is an interesting thing I want to share about teams and bots. So when you use adaptive card actions in bots, by default, submit will post data back to your bot, kind of behind the scenes. But if you want to trigger a message in the conversation, basically just a shortcut for these are typing it, and that's what I've done. So when I click on this, it's going to take BSTI and put it in the conversation thread. That's called an IM back when it does that. So I want to make sure my submit button does exactly that. In this case, I don't want to just post data secretly. I just want to put it in the chat and trigger the bot flow as a nice way. So the way we do that, using an adaptive card action submit, which has a data property, we have a special one for MS Teams, and this is how you say, I want to IM back this value into the conversation. So back in our designer, we say data, this is gonna be MS Teams, and then the type is IM back, and then the value is going to be MSFT. Got a button. We know this would work. We know this would post the data back to the conversation. But how do I data bind these? What we've done as of now is we added a $data, and you can really think of this as the data context. So it's setting the data context of this action to the suggested symbols. And just by doing that, and then a comma, and something else I've messed up. Okay, there we go. So just by doing that, we do some magic here. So we have this facility in place where you can assign a data context to an individual element. We do a little bit of magic though. If that element is bound to an array, we repeat the element for each item in the array and assign the rest of the properties to its data context. So if I want the title instead of hard coding MSFT, well, I want that to be the data context. And now I'm basically saying MSFT, Google, and Apple. And I want the same thing down here in the value. So now I've effectively got a fully generated card. I can tweak these, add new things, and the card is being data bound, automatically repeating actions. Some pretty compelling stuff. A little potentially confusing. Your feedback is most welcome. You know, we debated this a little heavily on should we just implicitly do this? Should we make this a more explicit thing like calling it $repeat or whatever? As of now, we're leaning towards we'll just make it implicit. If you're bound to an object, we pass that. If you're bound to an array, we duplicate everything. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll, again, definitely have time for questions on this at the end. But if you're following along, the next step is now, okay, we've got this template. This is the key thing we want to solve. How do you go from the designer to filling with real data and then back and forth? You know, that's the key thing I didn't really get across here. Once you've done this, you've translated that designer into the C# object model, you're kind of done. There's no taking it back to the designer. There's no, not easily anyway. You know, that's the key scenario we wanted to save. So you can save this, save it to your file system, populate with real data. And so that's what we're going to see next. So I've already done that. I've effectively saved the welcome template. Loads up. Hopefully everyone can see that. This is our template. The same thing we did before, just with pretty emojis and things like that. But everything, so it says, okay, cool. I can now save this into my bot. I can reuse it later. The only missing piece is how do I populate it with real data? So back in our bot, let's go to handle a new conversation started. And this is going to happen when someone joins or types hello, and I'm going to send a welcome card. So here's the basic flow of this, and it's pretty straightforward. So I want to initialize the suggested symbols with a pre-populated array in case this API call fails. So here's that API call I mentioned. I can click on it real quick and give you an idea of what this does. So again, this is why we're seeing that SVA in there. This is just, for whatever reason, the list of gainers from this API is just showing one. Last night it was more. But all we're doing is hitting this endpoint. It's an array of these stock quotes, and I'm just deserializing it into that list. And if it comes successfully, I am going to overwrite the suggested symbols variable with gainers. The API returns 10. So I just am using link syntax here to take 4 of them, and then I'm just selecting the symbol. So I'm hitting an API, returning it. This is all hopefully relatively straightforward. And now I'm putting it into a C# anonymous object that I'm going to pass to my template. My template expects 2 variables to be passed to it that we've seen. It needs a name, and it needs a suggested symbols array. So I'm putting data into that. I'm taking name from member name. So the bot framework gives us a member.name. They give us a channel account. That's why when I type hello, it says, welcome to the stock bot, Matt Heidinger. It just, the bot framework handles all that for me. So I'm passing that along. And then I'm sending an adaptive card reply. So this is a method that I wrote. I'm passing in the turn context. I'm saying I want to use the welcome template.json, which is that template we showed here. And I want to pass in this data. So what does this do? And this is effectively the magic. It's pretty simple. And just to prove we wanted to get rid of, well, we'll do that a little bit. So same flow, right? We're creating a reply. Someone said hello, we need to reply to them. We're going to get this template. So this is me saying I'm going to get all the text out of the environment content path plus templates plus the templating. And I'm basically just doing some string path querying to get to this file that I need to get the string out of it. This is the new thing. This is the new API. You guys are mostly probably familiar with, on all of our SDKs, we have an adaptive card.fromJSON, and we take in, by default, the card, right? So we take in a JSON card, it's a fully populated card, and that works. The new APIs we've had, the new overloads, take in either a template and an object of data, or a template and a string of data that basically JSON serialized. So instead of taking a fully populated card, I'm saying, hey, here's my template, here's the data, and then we turn that into a populated adaptive card, send the reply by adding an attachment, and just send it on in. So this is really the magic. This is where all that data binding is taking place. The beauty of this, ideally, if we get it right, is that you can write your template once and use the .NET API. You can use our JavaScript API, which is what the designer uses. The template language is something that we will support across all the adaptive cards ecosystems so that you can write these templates and then have them run client side natively on iOS, natively on Android. You don't have to use .NET. You don't have to do this on the back end. That's really the benefit of writing these templates once. And we'll get to why that can be cool a little later. But for now, hopefully that makes sense. We are basically as a team going to ship full support for the template binding syntax that we end up shipping across all of our SDKs. In this preview, we have JavaScript and we have .NET working. The mobile platforms are pretty close, but we need to finalize on exactly what we want in the language before we keep going. So that's the gist. That's how easy it was to just take that template, bind it to some data. We'll keep going real quick because I did want to show that I would cut this kind of code in half. So we're deleting all of the old and busted, right? We're going to get completely rid of this. We don't want any of this stuff. And instead, what we're going to do, since this method is gone, is how easy it is to just say, well, I'll show you real briefly without you having to make me or watch me go through it all. So here's the stock template. All I did in this was take our template, the stock sample, and replace it with the tokens that we've talked about. So it's the exact same sample, just replaced with some tokens. This you could have done today. But now let's populate it with some really brief data. So we've got this guy here. Click preview mode. And now you can kind of see, cool, I can easily edit my card, design it. This happens to be, Microsoft, but the symbol could be taco. I don't know if that's actually, maybe that is a symbol. But you kind of get it. So same idea. All I did was really quick. I clicked try it now. Obviously, you can imagine in the next version of our site, we will release samples that are templatized. So it'll actually be very easy for you to pick a sample. It'll have the templatized version of it that you see here. And then we'll have some sample data. So now I've got a great design time experience. The final step is obviously to populate this with real data from the API call. So that gets just as easy as we saw before. So same flow. This is me. So we're sending a stock quote today. I'm pulling out the symbol. If it's not hello, we're going to new up a client, do the same call to get a quote. So it's a different API versus gainers. This is just to get a quote. If it was successful, we serialize it into a stock quote, and then we're going to send it. So I am going to send adaptive card reply, pass in the turn context. It's all straightforward. And then now I need to just say, what template do I want to use? Well, the stock quote template.json, and then the data happened to be my quote. And that was it. It's that easy. Once you've got this little tiny boilerplate, the only two things you need are a template name and the data. And we will make sure we data bind all that. And to play with that, I'll just hit F5 here. One final piece I didn't really show, which is really neat. If you do clone this repo, and I'll publish, I think this branch is public, but it's mahiding / community call 219. Again, I'll send all that out. You clone this, you hit F5. You will need the bot framework emulator. That's a really nice tool for just connecting to a local host endpoint. So once that launches, I'll hit restart conversation. It's now connecting to our bot that we just built using the new templating stuff. And once he wakes up, we should be good to go. Restart a conversation. Come on, buddy. Don't die on me right at the end. Oh, there we go. Okay. And MSFT. Give you a quick idea of what's happening, Google or something. So the template name that was passed in was stock quote template.json. The data was that stock quote that we got from the API. You can just see it's a standard just C# object. And then I'm just hitting adaptive card.fromJSON, passing the template, passing the data, and what I get back is a fully populated adaptive card with a set of actions. Doesn't have any actions in it, but it's got body. You can see it's got the container. It's got my T text blocks that were bound to whatever. It's just, it takes all the boilerplate of you building up that C# object yourself. And the beauty is that once you've got this template written, it'll be portable within the ecosystem. You can certainly use .NET and fully populated card in the back end, but we have some kind of interesting plans and future stuff that I'll start to talk to in a little bit when you realize that, well, if these templates can be applied locally, if the adaptive card renderer knows how to apply them, you can start to do some client-side data binding that enables some pretty neat, some pretty neat scenarios. So I want to leave it open to questions at this point. See if people have, if people are at least following along. So and then I'll leave the one next thing I'm going to show, I'll walk through is a kind of preview of the docs and what we have now. It's certainly very early, but a set of the other functions. But that's kind of the final thing I'll go to, and then some feedback on next steps.
And if you guys want to ask questions, don't hesitate to either speak or paste the questions in the chat window, and we'll answer them as they come.
Yeah, at this point, I'd say please ask any questions you like to tee up some basic ones to kind of get the noodle going. Is, well, what can you do in the data binding language? I guess I'll at least start by kind of walking through this guy. Hopefully that's readable. Was it readable at this size? Hopefully it's semi-okay. This is the docs we're going to publish. This should be out, hopefully not very long. The dilemma right now is you're going to be kind of on your own in the designer. Like I said, we were excited to get this out there. We're certainly getting out very early. So we were really hoping to get some feedback. You are definitely on the cusp of things, though. There are bugs, as we've seen. And how do you know what works and what doesn't? I have the ability to ping David until he tells me, but you obviously won't have that. So our next thing we're going to get out is just a set of documentation. So I'll run through the basics. So inline data with your card. So the data can be provided with the card in two ways. It can be inlined, or it can be provided at runtime, as I showed with the adaptive card.fromJSON. But you could have just as easily put this $data here in the card. And in this case, I'm going to say, okay, here's an employee. He's Matt. His manager is Thomas, and he's got a few peers. And then now in my body, I could say, hi, employee name. Here's a bit about your org. Your manager is employee.manager.name. And your three peers are peer 0, peer 1, and peer 2. Not the best example I've ever typed up, but it was written about 20 minutes ago. So that's kind of a list of the basic, property syntax and array indexer syntax. And then we, of course, talked about, well, you don't have to inline the data. I think a key use case, and what we hope will be a key use case, is that these templates are just flat JSON files. So two topics that we're not going to talk about today that we're very much experimenting in, evaluating what are the scenarios are, if you've got these templates, well, what stops someone from hosting a set of templates, sharing templates? If I have a great set of templates over standardized data like restaurants or flights or anything on schema.org, couldn't we kind of have a template directory and then bind those locally with some data? The really cool thing about that is, since these are just flat JSON, the templating happens locally on the client. So this my person could have come from anywhere. It enables some really neat scenarios for sharing reusable templates without you having to send your data to a server. And I'll just kind of tee that up to maybe get the noodles spinning, but that's a really neat thing, a really powerful thing compared to other types of templates you may have seen. I'm still on the call, right, David? The team's just kind of active.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
here, yeah.
All right, good. So we talked about separating your template from data, cool. There are some binding scopes, so some basically reserved keywords. So we talked about $data. If you happen to be in a loop and you want to access the root object, you can do $root. Again, if you're in a loop, you can use something like $index. A key scenario that'll really get important, adaptive cards we showed in Teams. If you imagine a template being reusable and shared, well, if I wrote a really great restaurant template, I might want to tweak the UI based on the host characteristics. Maybe, it's, the viewport width or the theme that it's in or something about its host config. Does it allow actions or not? So a way of accessing the host configuration within the template. And then this is effectively a way of accessing another element within the card, which enables some kind of cool interactivity, declarative-based interactivity within the card as well. So again, nothing here is final. This is just the start of where we're at, but we wanted to share it and get early feedback. We talked about assigning data context. So you saw up here, I can put $data on the card. You can also put $data on an element, and this is what I alluded to. We do a little bit of magic if you put $data on an element that happens to be an array. So in this case, I'm saying, hey, I've got this text block. I'm assigning its data to these three objects that have a name property, and then the text is going to be data.name. And that's going to result in 3 text blocks. So this is going to implicitly loop this element and set its text to the individual binding scope. So it's a little bit of magic-y, but it is kind of cool when you get the feel for it. But definitely looking for feedback on that. Really, the last couple of things are, so anytime you start to grab some data and write a template over it as a real world example, I cheated a little bit, and I wouldn't say it's cheating. In most cases, you will have to massage the data a little bit. So my stock quote, right? One example you realize right away is that I want to color this text if the stock is either up or down, right? I want to do a basically ternary condition. So I look in my stock quote object, and I added a property called change color. And it's a basic getter, and it says if the change is greater than 0, I'm going to do good, and if it's otherwise, I'm going to be attention. And my template is binding to that change color. So the color is bound to that change color. So the stock API, obviously that I called, didn't have a property called change color. I had to massage the data a little bit. And that works great if you're able to do that. But if we ever want a scenario, and I think we do, where you can bind to arbitrary APIs, well, then the template language itself needs some way to massage the data a little bit. So that's where we start getting into some basic functions. Maybe you want to do substring. Maybe you want to know the length of a string, or to upper or to lower number functions. So rounding, formatting is going to be a huge one, right? As I poke through that data, obviously I'm formatting for currency, percent, decimal. Date functions. A trick on this is, parsing various formats. I thought I had it all figured out, and then I hit this API, and it returns date times in Unix timestamps, Unix millisecond timestamps. So I had to massage that a little bit. So I have this last name formatted. I have to do date time offset from Unix time millisecond. So I'm basically massaging the data before I can data bind to it. But what we want to do is hit that sweet spot where the data binding language can do some of these basic things. We're not going to do everything, we don't want to do everything. That adds more burden on every renderer, because basically what we're saying is any of these functions will work on any adaptive card SDK. We want the template language to be supported. So we're just looking to hit that sweet spot, 80% of the types of things you would want to do with JSON data, and then build a template over it. The last two are a little bit tricky, are data retrieval and manipulation. So parsing JSON, that's kind of an interesting one. Somewhere in here, I have an example where I was trying to build a template over a TFS item. And so this was a build, a VS DevOps. So this was a build, and I was trying to build an adaptive card template to show the status of the build and the release. And what I found was the message was a JSON serialized string for whatever reason. So when I wanted to template it, well, I needed some way to parse that JSON. So I won't kind of go into all of it, but effectively you can imagine something like the message is parse JSON. Imagine these set of functions. Imagine a set of, this is what I talk about, massaging the data. So that TFS item had a status enum of 4. Well, I want to massage that into a Boolean called is successful. So I just say, yeah, it's successful if status equals 4. So this is basically just a way of me doing some transforms over the data.
Matt, if you wanted to be adventurous right now, instead of imagining, JSON.parse actually works in the designer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What I think would be the best way is if you want to type that up right now, and then if we get it working, we could switch over.
Problem that I don't have that payload that you were showing with that serial.
If you've got explorations cloned, it's in template language index.
I'm not sure I do have it right now.
Well, we can try to get to it. If we don't get any questions, certainly let's get to it. But
yeah,
so,
I mean, it's already 9:45. The suffice to say that JSON.parse already does what Matt suggested. It's JSON capital .parse lowercase, and it does just that.
Yeah.
If you want to try it.
So really kind of that's where we're at. We'll publish this out. This is the gist of what we want in the data binding language itself. Again, this will be a cross-platform supported, wholly supported by adaptive cards, data binding language. I think like this would be our biggest kind of call to action would be take a look at anyone who's invested in this or interested in this, take a look at the data that you're getting. I happen to query the TFS, I don't know if I'll ever get that acronym out of my head, the DevOps endpoint, and was like, hey, how can I template that data? I hit the stock endpoint. I said, how can I template that data? I had a JSON, a schema.org flight object. How can I template that? And we're trying to just tease apart what are the most common types of things, what'll get us 80% of the way there, that we feel really comfortable that we're at least solving something that is going to solve the real world problems without going too far. Maybe people don't need math.average. We were just like, hey, maybe people might need this, but we're really trying to ground this in real world use cases where people are trying to template the types of data that they have. So I'll share this out as soon as I can. I'll share most of this out soon. These docs are going to take just a little bit more to flesh out, but you should expect stuff within the coming weeks. But tomorrow, or by the end of today, this designer you can hit now, and this branch I think is live on the Adaptive Cards GitHub. It's just mahiding/community call 219. And then you can clone this, F5 it, play with the bot emulator, and just start playing today. You will be a little bit on your own until we publish the docs. I think that was it. I think I got all my call to action. Again, this, I guess, summarized like, what features, do you need to template, not transfer, to template 90%, transfer, yes, okay, that was right. Transfer 90% of the data binding to the card itself. I mean, that's our goal, is that you can hit the most common types of endpoints and then just template it without doing this intermediary data massage. The ternary operator is a very common one, right? So I had a change arrow. I either want it to be up or down. So I should be able, in theory, our argument is you should be able to author this in the card itself. A simple way of writing an expression, if this is greater than 0, then do this. So these are the things. All of this we're going to most likely move to the card template itself, where I wouldn't have to write this C#. Did we get any template questions? You want me to switch over? Let me see if I can switch over to that.
Well, some positive feedback, and also how to get to the code on GitHub.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll definitely send all those out. I think I demoed everything I wanted. Are we forgetting anything? Oh,
No, I think that was pretty exhaustive.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you've been answering most of these. So questions on, is this 1.2? And no, this is most likely, yeah. Okay. So yeah, you've been answering all that. Okay.
Yeah, there was a question about when we're going to ship 1.2. So obviously there's build coming. It's always a great moment to have something like that to announce at build, but we're not tied to, this is an open source tech. Let's say, hopefully by build, it will be ready. Right, Matt?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll know certainly more about build in the coming months. I think a blog post is a really great point, though, to kind of string all these things together. I think we can definitely get that out in the next couple of weeks. Basically, the basic docs. Here's a designer, and then here's some stuff to play with. I think we can definitely get that out.
Did we hear a question? If there was a spoken question, we couldn't hear you properly. Well, glad you liked it.
I'll just kind of tease this up. I mean, effectively, that was the talk. We very much appreciate the turnout, especially having such a last minute kind of agenda. Topics, I'd say for stuff that we'd love to get people's feedback on are, once you've got data binding, what are some of the scenarios that you would like beyond that? Once we've got these templates, let's say David, who actually does make some really beautiful templates for Outlook, he wrote a really great restaurant template. Well, it stands to reason that he could just share that or host that JSON template with you, and then you could use it as long as you retrieve your restaurant data, maybe from Yelp or from whatever that's in schema.org. We can start to create this ecosystem of shared templates. Again, because they're just flat JSON files. Like a template directory is just a file share, downloads the templates. The data happens locally. You can get the data wherever you want, from your own API, from Yelp, if you want to build your own stock API. And what about kind of composing them together? So you can certainly imagine, maybe I want to return 3 stocks. What if I want to compose multiple templates inside the same card, reuse remote ones, potentially remote data loading? Is that a use case that you guys have, where maybe I want the card itself to load the data for me, whereas everything we've shown so far is that it's in the data is assumed to either be in the card in JSON format or provided via API. But what if we could say, hey, here's a URL to my data, can you fetch it for me? Is that something that would be useful? I think that's really it. We talked a little about the conditional display, a really cool thing that we think we're going to need, and we're just vetting out scenarios. And we're hoping the host config querying will work, but you can certainly imagine an option where you need the template to tweak its UI based on either host or data characteristics. So I'd say those are the 4 major explorations we're in. Once we've got the data binding, how do we tie it together into a really great scenario that you guys need? So please reach out to myself and David if you have something like that. Again, to summarize, composing and reusing templates, remote template loading via URL, remote data loading via URL, and then kind of the whole conditional display of a template based on characteristics. I'd say those are the things we're evaluating to make sure we get right.
Yeah, and if I can add one little thing, there are still a number of features that might be useful in the templating language itself that we might not have thought of. So if you have feedback about that, stuff that would be absolutely necessary for this model to be useful to you, please let us know. For example, we think we need to allow for custom functions, as in a host being able to declare additional functions that are not built in, that can be used within any template that the host will eventually render. Is that something that is useful to you? Is it something that we should do? Would you rather us not doing it?
Yeah.
And whatever you can think of. And also on top of it all, I'd like to say that even though we are showing all of this in the context of adaptive cards, it so happens that the templating, the data binding language that we've worked on is actually independent of adaptive cards and can technically be used to transform any JSON payload into any other JSON payload.
Mm-hmm.
That does mean that what we're going to produce, we're going to heavily use with adaptive cards, but that's also going to be a template and data binding engine that's available across all platforms. As far as I know, there are not so many of those available in the wild.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm happy with the time. That we'll give everyone 5 minutes back. Again, let me just put up mine and David's email. Just matt.heidinger@microsoft.com and dcloux@microsoft.com. Reach out to us. This is so being baked right now that you truly do have massive influence over where we go with this. So I'd say, yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.